I felt like the future of technology was going to be trillions of niche data sets as compared to one big moat. And when you think about communities that we work in, it's a little bit of both, right? You have all these sort of bespoke, thin sets of data that are really deep. And then you tie them up, right? So you think about the Rising Tide community, for instance, as an example. We all have our own ones, but you can stitch them together.
Yeah.
And you have a really interesting sort of tapestry that's happening. And you can model against that. You can create segments against that. You can do all the really cool things.
The greatest migration is underway. It is changing every facet of our economy and our lives. I'm so excited to be talking to entrepreneurs, leaders, and investors who are on the front line of that change. Hi, my name is Alpha Damalash. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rising Tide Capital, working on the front lines of change with extraordinary innovators.
Today's special guest is James Johnson-Piett, founding principal and CEO of Urbane Development and board chair of Mangrove Community Wealth, Inc. In this age of AI-driven technology, James utilizes the Rising Tide model in Flatbush, Brooklyn, while being an advocate for inclusive community investment. James cultivates a model that treats local entrepreneurs as drivers of innovation, economic mobility, and shared ownership in underserved neighborhoods. In part 1, James shares how his journey began. In conversation with host Alpha Damalash, he shares his insights on data, culture, and how we can build and invest in community infrastructure to support long-term resilience and shared flourishing.
James Johnson-Piett. I'm so excited that we finally get the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation. We've known each other for a very long time. And so I would love to kick off with an introduction, with our roots, get to hear a little bit about what brings you to this couch all these many years later to help me shape what this moment is that we're living through. James, what's happening? Let's kick off with the roots.
Sure. Well, good to see you, Alpha. Appreciate the invite. I'm happy to be at 311. It's a beautiful space, and I'm excited to see your vision manifest in a real physical form after so many years. So it's exciting to be here. Thank you. The roots, man. All right. So I own a firm called Urbane Development. Started 17 years ago. I always say in my mama's basement. It was in the throes of one of the many black swan moments we've had over the last 20 years. I quit my job, and I'll probably get that in a bit, but I quit my job 2 months before the financial crisis really had the meltdown in place. And so I ended up creating a company that didn't really have a mission, just to sort of have a safe harbor for when I needed to figure out how to get out of the sort of proverbial rain. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I always joke, and I'm like, I feel like I'm in the Matrix. Not to be all sort of founder cult of personality or anything like that, but this is if you've seen the second Matrix, it's when Neo meets the guy from the source, and he realizes that he's done this 6 or 7 times before, and you're like, wait a minute, this is version 6 of the Matrix, but this particular moment is a different moment than the other 5, right? And the predecessor folks had a certain motivation. And I think my roots are in an interesting place now because they've grown to a place because I have, and that gets to the Mangrove, I have propagating happening with my kids. And so now the reason to be is a little different. And so I think hopefully this version of the Matrix, this version of Urbane, this version of my platform, I guess, will evolve in a way that's a little bit more differentiated because of them. And because of my lovely wife too, but just the evolution of that relationship is really playing a role in how I'm thinking about the future of my company.
Amazing. And let me just say, I'm so glad you brought the Matrix in because I find myself baking way too many chocolate chip cookies. Not to say that I...
You are an oracle. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay.
Well, the nickname sticks. So if that's what you're saying, I'll bake you a chocolate chip cookie. Find Neo and let's get moving. Yes. But tell a little bit about, because, I think, yes, we joke around chocolate chip cookies and whatnot. For me, a big part of what was so exciting about meeting you is somebody who is so rooted and brilliant in, investing and place-based investing and economics and finance, and yet also deeply, deeply rooted in community and relationships and culture and like what makes life worth living. We can all be book smart or do whatever, but at the end of the day, understanding relationships matter most was, I think, what the organization that actually brought us together, Bali, now Common Future, kind of gifted to us as bringing us together from many different parts of the country. And so I'm curious if you would dig a little bit deeper into those kind of roots, place-based, local economy building roots, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it started from when I was growing up, right? I grew up in North Philadelphia in the 80s. It was not the best place to be, all things equal. Although, I think you always hear these tropes of like, it was like the hood wasn't the best place to be, but it was home and I love it. And all that was very real. I think if I were going to distill down where the roots for me started, it was the need to always have to supplement, right? Like the baseline was never enough. You had to figure out like how to patch things together. And so I watched my mom do this. I watched my dad do it. I watched my grandmother do it. I watched them sort of drown a little bit in trying to do too much, and then deal with the sort of travails of having to do too much. But also it kind of imbues a certain level of work ethic and entrepreneurial spirit. It's just because you see it, everyone's doing it, right? It's not like one person in your family's doing it. Like the entire community is all hustling, right? And so, I'll freely admit I had a charmed life in a lot of ways. So I was able to go to a really elite high school that wasn't in Philly. It was a boarding school in New Hampshire. I went to, pretty good college, et cetera, et cetera. And there was dual paths were always kind of getting created for me where I'm like, I am not the only person with talent, skills. I said opportunity and access in ways that other people didn't. And some of that was luck and some of that was I guess providence. But I think end of the day, I saw an opportunity that was both like a market opportunity, because I'm like, there's not this level of access and opportunity for the folks that I see around me who I know are super talented. How could I marshal resources to those folks? But also selfishly, I wanted my community to be better. And if they were able to be invested in, I could see that happening. It always came back down to me. Someone told me this a while ago, and I've always held whole with this sort of statement. Unfortunately, the wealthy get invested in, and the poor get services. And I always felt like I've watched this sort of community sort of get service to death, right? And I wanted to do something where you could marshal investment to a place. And to your point just now, it's a mixture of monetary investment and infrastructure investment, but it really was about like, how do you preserve and amplify culture? How do you see the opportunities around innovation occur in the everyday that happens in our neighborhoods? Because the scarcity provides this sort of frankly, is fertile ground for innovation in a way that people don't want to recognize. And the informal economy, the gray economy, whatever you want to call it, like it is the ultimate leveler in my mind, because you are so scarce in your resources. You have to come up with the best ideas to sort of move up the ladder a bit. We see this happen abroad as well, but even here in the States, that constant churn, there's a really interesting innovation cycle that I think mirrors the ones that we give a lot of credence to when we think about Silicon Valley and these other sort of spaces of innovation. The only difference is you plow billions of dollars in those spaces. You don't do it in our neighborhoods. And so I just wanted to create something that I felt like was going to speak to that a little bit. And like I mentioned with the Matrix, I've had to go through several versions of the idea to get to a place where I think now, I hope it's the right refinement of what I've been trying to create, but it always came back down to this idea of community wealth building. And so how do you do that?
And this is so great. So I want to unpack scarcity a little bit, and we'll do it in a minute. But I think I'm curious as you kind of dig back into your roots, because this often happens. I had a similar journey of having come from Ethiopia and having had the opportunity to attend, an elite school and so on and so forth. There's a sense that like actually doing better or succeeding looks like going in a certain direction, following the money, making the money, finding it, hoarding, or not hoarding it, but like essentially versions of that. Financial success looks a certain way. And so the tension of like going back or in some way reconnecting yourself or rerouting yourself to say my definition of wealth or my definition of investment looks different. Was there a tension like that in your life where you could have gone a certain way, but you chose to do either a U-turn or a different kind of a turn?
I'd say yes, and it's continual, right? There's many moments I'll freely admit where I'm sitting in my house with my wife discussing, why aren't we where we want to be, et cetera, and sort of this long arc of struggle that comes along trying to like birth something that's different in the face of frankly, a society and a infrastructure that you're trying to push against. And then at the same time, try to be comfortable and safe and all the things that we kind of need just to be good humans. There's a constant rub there. But certainly in the beginning, it was 100%, do I want to work the inside game? Do I want to really think about trying to make change within a certain construct, or whether it's corporate or whatever else? And I realized, I think, fairly quickly, I'm an alley cat. I needed to be I needed to be in I need to be out in the weeds a little bit. I need to be out there tussling, hustling.
Yeah.
I think that's how I worked best.
And what is it about being an alley cat? Like, why did you choose that metaphor? Like, what do alley cats do? What is the thing that made you say, yeah?
Because they can't be in the house all the time. They have to be able to run out and have a little bit of freedom I'd say to both just have the freedom to sort of roam, and then also the freedom to kick up some dust a little bit, get in some fights. Like, like if you're in the house, you scratch up somebody's couch or their carpet, you get declawed, right? But if you're out in the alley, iron sharpens iron, whatever metaphor you want to use, and if you got pee on people a little bit, you do that too, right? And so like you get to be a little bit disrespectful, in hopefully the right ways to toughen you up a little bit. But there's a double-edged sword, obviously, right? Because if you're in the muck so much, sometimes it can be hard to go back into the house, right, and be accepted. And so you're trying to find the right balance. Yeah. I do joke, but in all seriousness, this idea of, I always talk about Urbane as like, it is a platform where we can be in the boardroom and the block, right? And so how do you sort of have those dualities sort of play out? And the thing is, it's not as easier to be in the boardroom per se, but there's a certain set of rules that are relatively constant. The evolution of corporate America, capitalism, whatever structure you want to think about, like you kind of know the rules a little bit. Yeah. I love the harkening back to the Matrix metaphors, but when you're in a space where physics don't apply, like you could fly if you wanted to, and you have to believe it, like that's more of the block, because the block is constantly shifting and changing. And so you're having to sort of be really good at pivoting, or really good at understanding how people sort of maneuver, because depending on what happens day to day, things can completely change. Yeah. And so having those two modalities be ones where like you have to sort of figure out how to move through a slower process and be more staid, and then also have to be really dynamic at the same time. It creates a good muscle. It's interesting though, trying to build a platform, a company that has employees and has sort of an ethos where people have to learn all that. That's been interesting. And that's what I mean by like all the different versions of who we are. Because trying to do all that becomes a more complicated matter when you're trying to imbue both mission and vision and tactical execution in an alley and in the boardroom. So like you have all these variables. And it's been successful in some cases, not in some others, but.
Yeah, so I love that. And I'm thinking about somebody who is like really young, maybe like in their, third year of college, or maybe somebody who's chosen not to go to college, but who may be listening to this conversation and going, okay, what were the decisions you made? How did being in the boardroom and on the block before Urbane, before Mangrove, before these other organizations that you've created, what happened between that moment, before you left college, and Urbane?
Well, it's interesting. So I went to boarding school for high school, and in a lot of ways, my high school experience mimicked what most people went through in college. I was away from home. I was in a pretty rigorous academic platform where you had to like really show up and almost compete in battle in the classroom as much as you would like on an athletic field or anything like that. And so by the time I got to college, it wasn't that difficult to sort of figure out, okay, this is how you play the game per se, right? And so, I had this sort of collision of my home life was relatively chaotic. There was a lot going on. And in school, it was like, okay, like I can see the game being played, and I was a little like, this isn't real life, right? It felt like I was playing a game a little bit. I had the benefit to be able to go abroad. I went to Japan for almost a year. Back then. And so like, by the time I was 20, I done a good amount of things and realized that all the things were awesome. And also fundamentally, I was like, no one else in my life has had like the opportunity to just play around, right? It's always been about hustle, grind, like I gotta eat. And I had enough space to breathe and it's sort of try to figure some things out, but also seeing the disconnect that came along with that not only the access of opportunity around the educational pathways and sort of the knowledge base and the networks and everything that comes along with being part of these institutions, but just the space to be able to relax and mess up and get into trouble in whatever ways you're doing that. And so I knew at that point that whatever I was going to do was going to eventually be in a space where like I had a little bit more latitude to again be that alley cat, I guess. So the beginnings of that was coming, but I also recognized how important those networks were around like this is the current structure of how our societies are running. These are the things that sort of make sort of our communities tick. I got to understand this stuff. And so it wasn't wholly intentional. I think it was more part visceral, part just sort of, again, probably I mentioned Providence earlier. I think it was a little guiding hand from beyond, you know, my purview. But I started out when I got out of undergrad, I worked in municipal finance. And so I was a bond underwriter for a couple of years. And so I learned how, frankly, cities and utility companies and other folks sort of made money and how they deployed it. And so that experience was interesting, but it was boring. But I needed to know it, right? It's funny enough, as I'm sitting in a VCast, I also was, so my side hustle was I was doing film editing. So back in the day, I edited on Avid. So these huge Avid decks, you know, and funny enough, so we're not that far from New York.
Yeah.
I would come up from Philly to New York. Industry City, before it was Industry City, was a sort of blown out husk. And there were people in there renting space for like $1 a square foot, doing all kind of creative sort of activities in this sort of really, again, off the grid, off the beaten path structure. And so I was editing video, I was doing screenwriting and sort of shorts for folks. And, you know, that was what I was doing on that side of the ledger and trying to figure out, I'm like, this is a lot of fun, but I can't figure out how to make this a career, like really, right? I didn't have that, I guess I didn't have that in me. And so I was doing a little bit of both. My girlfriend at the time, when I was getting too bored of municipal finance, she was like, well, you know, there's a fellowship in urban planning. I know you like cities. She's like, you know, so why don't you do that? And I was like, okay, that could be really cool. And my boss at the time was like, you're not gonna like be an urban planner. And in my head, I was like, well, what do you mean? Like they plan cities? I'm like, who doesn't want to do that?
Alleyways need to be planned too.
Absolutely. Like call them a breezeway. Like figure out what the nomenclature needs to be. But he was pretty emphatic. I remember Scott Nadal. It seared in my brain. He's like, James, you're not gonna like it. And I'm like, well, that means I have to do it. So I do this fellowship, and day 2, I'm like, yep, he was right. And no knock on urban planning, because I think urban planning and urban planners are really needed players in its ecosystem.
Absolutely.
But you know, whatever you want to call it, whether it was Robert Moses or historically speaking, the idea of capital planning has gone away for decades. And so the planners don't have the purse strings anymore. Once that disappeared, they were, you know, ginning up things that they didn't have control over.
I see.
And that was really frustrating for me. I didn't need to be like the true master planner builder or anything like that. I was 25 or whatever, however old it was. But to not be able to think about my community and say, hey, I have a vision for this thing, and not be able to have the tactical steps to execute just made no sense to me. And I was like, as a position point, I'd much rather be an entrepreneur. I'd much rather be somebody who can be in control of some of the levers, even if it was a smaller scale, than what this was. But I did learn a lot about the mechanism of how cities planned, right? So I had the money, I had the planning. And so, of course, again, randomly, I met this really affluent guy, Michael Karp. I'll give him a shout out, Michael Karp. So he was one of the smart folks in the 70s who saw Penn beginning to do its thing around property purchasing, and he grabbed a bunch of stuff in West Philly and made his fortunes in real estate and telecom. And he wanted to give back in his own way, so he created a charter school network at that time, and was very adamant about black male participation in that, and had a real hard time struggling to find black male teachers. And so he had his idea of urban geography. He felt like kids in neighborhoods didn't really understand the full mechanics of what was around them. So they could, you know, and they were so tethered to their blocks anyway to understand what went into them. And so when I was in my planning commission fellowship, he reached out to the Planning Commission and said, hey, could we figure something out where you guys help us sort of structure a curriculum for kids around space?
Okay.
And so that was my assignment. And so I was working on this thing for half the year, and it was cool, but, you know, I was like, all right, well, that's great, but I'm about to do something else. And don't forget, I'm still doing my screenwriting. And I wrote this short called Ascendant, and it was all about how
Ascendant. I like that name. Okay.
that'll come back later. But it was all about astrology and mathematics, and how you know, essentially our current society, and particularly the scientific establishment, wanted to bury sort of the mysticism side to science, and there's a whole power structure behind the scenes, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that, like, I wrote this short script, and I was really excited about it, and we started filming it, and I was at a moment where I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually go on the film. And so, because I was like, I don't like urban planning, I'm going to do something else. And so I was going to take a road trip around the country and sort of figure it out on my way out to doing this. And I had that plan for the end of the summer. So this guy gives me, you know, he's like, hey, I really want you to work for my school. And I was like, I'm not a teacher. I'm not certified in this stuff. Like, I'm like, kids are fine, but that's not my bag. Every time I talked to the dude, the offer went up a little bit, up a little bit, up a little bit. And as I was on my road trip, I was like, you know, I was going cross country, and every stop, it was like, okay, can I really do this? Can I teach? I'm like, well, if he gives me enough money, I can save up to do my film. And that's how I started thinking about it from that perspective. And so by the time I got to Vancouver, which was where I ended up, he gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I took it.
Okay.
And I became a rapidly sort of trained math prep teacher, sex ed teacher, and I ran the after-school program for the charter school. And then I did, obviously, the urban geography curriculum. So I was a little bit of jack of all trades of this thing.
All preparation for what was to come.
So I would say that, and I'm creating this sort of journey point because now I'm learning how urban ed is working, right? And I'm learning what 12-year-olds, what frankly, I'm watching a facsimile of myself when I was 12, who didn't necessarily have the same inflection point. And then you drop, frankly, me, again, I don't want to sound aggrandizing, but you drop someone like me who has a similar background, but also has some different choices I was able to make. What does that mean, right? And it was interesting for me because, you know, again, I wasn't that old, but these kids looking at me, first sizing me up, because that's always happen, you know, with kids. They're trying to figure out, like, are you about that life or not? And so once you flex a little bit, and you're like, I'm about this life. Okay, now, are you unk? Oh, I'm big. No, sorry, I'm big, bro. I wasn't unk yet.
Yeah, not unk. Yeah, no.
big,
You're too young for unk. Okay.
Well, I'm unk now, right?
I'm still trying to hold on, but go on.
But I'm big, bro. And you're trying to sort of like respect what the parents are doing, but also recognizing that, like, there is an opportunity to sort of give someone some different, you know, some different sort of direction points that are there. And I remember just being like, this is not the right medium for me, but it's the right output, if that made sense. And I didn't know where the outcomes were going to come from, but I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to touch people, but this isn't the right one. I'm not an educator in that way. And then sex ed was freaky because I had to deal with sixth graders who, like, were asking questions I didn't really want to answer, but I did get trained in it, so I could do it. And my counterpart basically was like a facsimile of Dr. Ruth. It was a hilarious sort of setup where it was like me and this, like, you know, octogenarian white woman who was like, we were a fun group in West Philly. So I did it for about a year and a half, and then I got a different offer because at that point I said, you know what, I love the film work, but I need to figure this out. Like, I need something more stable. And I got an offer to work at a nonprofit called the Food Trust. And at that point, this is before the term food desert became a thing. Right? It wasn't really a concept. People experienced it, but it wasn't a concept. So my job there was to, frankly, measure what a food desert was, because we had a revolving loan fund that could then fund supermarkets in the food deserts. And so so it was like this, and this space didn't really exist up until this point, right? And so I got pushed into this experience where very rapidly you're sort of making things up as you go along. The loan and the grant terms were kind of, I mean, I can say this now in all respect to my colleagues back then, but yeah, there was no script. So
Yeah.
we were in the alley a little bit trying to figure it out.
Yes.
You know, this alley was like a random boardroom. So I figured I'd get there. So,
There you go. There you go. Yes.
so all these like random little experiences got me to a place where I was 26, 27, however old I was, in rooms with people a lot older than me and didn't look like me. But you know, I had a certain level of power because I was offering them something that was unique, and trying to horse trade in that space. So the hustle part came into it. Obviously, like I could negotiate. I could sort of talk about what I wanted.
And what kind of negotiations are you talking about?
So you are a supermarket operator. Let's say you're Pathmark. Let's go back in the day. So you know, folks who are
Or our local guy over here, Pioneers. Okay.
Pioneer. Well, probably bigger than Pioneer. So
Pioneer,
think ShopRite. So like you're of that ilk.
Okay.
And you know, you're contemplating coming into, you know, a neighborhood you typically wouldn't come into, and I'm offering you a sweetener. So in this case, we have grants and loans for the build out, your equipment, your workforce, the real estate you might want to purchase if you were going to do that. But you're going to a neighborhood that's not typical for you. And so, you know, you're coming to me and you're saying, well, the cost base is going to be more because people are going to have more shrinkage, i.e. people are going to steal more stuff. Or people aren't going to buy our high margin goods because they're all on EBT. And my pushback is, okay, and this is where I get nerdy again. Well, you're looking at it from a central tendency perspective. What's the median household income look like? What's the average XYZ? What's the median XYZ? Right. You're going to hyperdense neighborhoods. What you care about is volume, right? I care more about if I have 10,000 people per square mile versus 2,000 people per mile. Even if your central tendency is smaller, you got more people coming through. So are you open to thinking about merchandising differently and finding different product sets or thinking about employing differently? We can help with that gap when it comes to the money. So there shouldn't be a reason why you can't make this work. Now, I was ignoring some other friction, right? Which is like you have an operating modality that's even with that sweetener, you're still going to have to change the way you behave. Different issue, right? Behavior and attitude is not the same thing as being able to give you resource. But at least I can begin to present some analytics to say there's a case to be made here, right? That the kid that I'm teaching in the school could be your cashier, who can then become your assistant manager, who could become something else. So all these little experiences I was having in all my life was like, okay, the economics make sense in this context. The people make sense in this context. The urban spatial stuff makes sense in this context. What do you want to do?
And you're still, you know, big bro in that sense.
And I'm still big bro in that sense.
It's a different way of being, like, and I can completely relate to that. It's so funny because as you were telling the story of the teens, and it actually makes me think about like, I wonder how many people are having that experience, because for me too, mentoring young kids in the inner cities of Boston, I thought that's exactly what I was supposed to do. And then I was running around with all these 12-year-olds thinking, oh my gosh, I don't think this is my calling. I know how critical they are. They are our literal future is what I call them. And now I have a 12-year-old, so I know like what it is. And yet, like, it takes a very special kind of personality to really want to be there with them and walk and ask the question, see the world through their eyes. So I've been there, and then I made a very similar call to say it has to be an indirect way to support their future. That isn't me in front of the classroom or any kind of a room trying to shape their mindset. So I really appreciate the discovery of that. Maybe this is why we're fast friends when we first met. Okay, so now we're getting into the systems and tensions dynamic. So you do this work with the Food Trust, and I do remember, you know, a lot of us were really eager, especially from a community building, community wealth building, economic development. Like, how do you finance healthy foods in communities that don't have access to them? So take us from there to Urbane and
So very quickly, I became the grocery guy. So six foot.
Even I thought of you that way. I'm like, we got groceries. Let's see, James might have a thought about how to fix this one.
And so, you know, 6 foot black dude, younger. I'm in these spaces where it's definitely an older industry. I'm having to learn a lot too. So, you know, I actually went back to school to really learn commercial real estate, because I was like, okay, I know some of this stuff. I really want to understand the dynamics of how, like, you really get something built like this. So what was interesting in the moment, especially like 04, 05, 06, like, we're running up into the housing crisis is being fomented in the moment. So like there's really weird signals that are happening when it comes to real estate. But on the flip side, when you're thinking about like trying to convince a supermarket operator who has a pretty old modality, like up until that point, the idea of a smaller footprint was still like, wait a minute. And it's like, okay, going back to the point I was making earlier, you're looking at the way in which you make decisions the wrong way because people are changing their behaviors. They're moving differently. Technology, even back then, is starting to sort of shift how we sort of consume, et cetera, et cetera. The internet's a thing.
Internet's a thing.
Right, how you think about it, right? And so we're having all these conversation points. And, in the meantime, I am sitting on a little bit of a purse string. I'm saying, okay, like I can entice you. But what was interesting, I feel like I can say this now because I'm so far away from it, but I also knew the structure was failed. We were trying to get people to change behavior through money. And some of the issues were sort of time bound. So when you think about supermarket, you think about it in your own community, right? You're not thinking about the supermarket just in year one. You're thinking about this thing being a stable anchor in your community for a long time.
Forever.
So for them, they're thinking about a 15-year lease, a 20-year lease, and the life cycle of that lease. So if I'm supporting your year one and maybe year two, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But their concern is much about year 7, year 14. What do I do?
Yeah.
And the problem with that was for them to make a leap and say, okay, you're going to give me $1 million, $2 million, or whatever, unless I really buy into everything you're saying in year 5, 10, 15, 20, I'm not making that choice really, right? And so for some folks who did buy into the program, I felt like we weren't necessarily trying to convince someone to do something different. It was, we were doubling down on their initial instincts, which wasn't a bad thing. But the problem was it wasn't going to be so dynamic in the industry that it was going to change the way people thought about supermarket siting. It was going to help this particular operator who has a particular thesis make his thesis work and help them grow, which was great.
Yeah.
But they weren't going to solve a system problem, right? I was solving an entrepreneurial problem around like, in essence, I was like, cool, we're going to be a catalyst for this particular entrepreneur to sort of show improve. But it was always tricky because in the back of your head, you're like, this works in a certain context. It was very bespoke. It worked in a particular moment, in a particular context, and that was great in that context, in that moment, but it wasn't going to be catalytic in my mind. So the other problem was most folks didn't want to go there. And so we still had this money, and it was like, all right, well, how can we move this money? And I looked around, going back to, again, this lived experience. I'm like, wait a minute, like there's bodegas and corner stores and Korean markets and all these folks who are already in these communities now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And in my mind, I'm like, from an infrastructure perspective, with a little bit of a twist, they could sell all the things we're talking about. Or even better, they already did back in the day. They just started selling less of it because they didn't see a market need for it. Right? So you're going back to this attitudinal sentiment behavior rubric, right? And so for me, it was always coming back down to how you marry market dynamics. Like people want to be satiated because they're hungry, right? Can I afford the thing I'm getting? And then do I know what it's going to satisfy beyond just my hunger, right? Like, and I think people don't think about that when you think about food.
Yeah.
Like there is an experiential element tied to it, clearly. But we always move it into like the restaurant or the sort of the convivial space.
Yeah.
But grocery stores are convivial. Like you go there and you see people and you hang out, you talk, you run through the car seats, all that kind of stuff. And even the smaller stores like the Bodega Man, like Poppy, right?
Yes.
like, and I always talked about this, and this is I'll get you to Urbane because this is really the kernel of Urbane's principle.
Yeah.
It was trusted spaces that were resilient in place, right?
Yes.
It's like the bodega, the beauty salon, just the corner itself. Like these things are naturally things that people know in neighborhoods.
Trusted places that are resilient in space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like
I love that.
churches and like these institutions that are there, and they can weather economic, social storms. And you have people usually at the center of those things that are sort of acting as the stewards or the sherpas in that moment. And my whole thing was, well, if I can support them, I can resource them, I can invest in them. There's some things that we can catalyze around that. And so that's where the germ of Urbane was kind of born. It was a hand-to-hand work that I was doing with entrepreneurs, mostly immigrants actually, in these neighborhoods who own stores. And I think I heard was almost earlier, I was everything to everyone. So I was one person's developer, one person's bookkeeper, like one person's sort of therapist, as I was kind of working through all the stuff.
Yeah.
But I at that point had some resources to bring to bear because I could invest in their store. So we did this the first.
And you're also learning like so much. I mean, we talk about like proximity and perspective, and it's like the richness of understanding an entrepreneur or that, bodega shop owner from all of those vantage points as a financier, as somebody who's thinking about the real estate that they're standing on, and a therapist. Because they may be saying, hey, it's not working. I don't know. Get me out of here. And you're like, wait, let's talk about this. Yeah.
And so to that point, it was a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to where I needed to go with Urbane, I was like, again, I was getting sick of the job. Funny enough, my plan was to get this property in a neighborhood of Philly and convert it to sort of micro apartments for younger people. Because my whole thing was like, you should be able at 25 to get your first place. If you could figure out smaller, like, $50,000 investment, you should be able to tap in. And so I saw this property on short sale, and I saved up all my pennies to sort of buy this thing. And I wanted to put a sort of healthy bodega on the ground floor. Okay. That was my first real estate project that I had dreamed up in my head. And then the crisis happens, and that bank melted down. Like it did not exist within 2 months.
Oh my!
And so I quit my job before this all happened. I was burnt out, went to Italy. So I was speaking at the Slow Food International Conference about all this bodega work, and then I was going to burn off my PTO and then move on. And then obviously everything happens while I'm out there, because it was like the middle of October. I remember because Obama was about a month away from getting elected. A lot of excitement in Rome at that point, and I was sitting there like freaking out, like what the hell am I going to do? And so Urbane was okay, I got to figure something out. At the same time, I was doing all the corner store stuff. The national supermarket work was really coming into fruition. So I was running around the country in Chicago, New York, New Orleans, other places, just talking about like this revolving loan fund concept. And so I ended up doing some work in Detroit. And so what ended up happening, everything goes crazy, but they still wanted to create a fund for doing the work in Detroit. And they had philanthropy to really step up when the banks wouldn't. And so in that case, they were like, well, it's going to be smaller, but we can still do a revolving loan fund, but we want to do some other things around grocery stores in Detroit. Can you help us? And so I was like, well, I have a shingle that was supposed to be a real estate entity. I'll just make it a consultancy for now.
I can pivot.
And I was like, I guess I'll be the grocery guy for a couple more years. Because at that point, I was like,
no more groceries. Nobody called me about groceries.
At that point, when I started Urbane, and for years I was still the grocery guy, but it's just because I had to eat proverbially. So, so that happened. My first client was the city of Detroit, and my second client was the city of Newark. And so they wanted to replicate the corner store work. So very quickly, I had pivoted into sort of the first version of Urbane, which was, okay, we're going to really support municipalities thinking about this issue around food access, but through a market-based solution point. So we'll work with the entrepreneurs to get them tighter, better, stronger. We'll think about the physical plant, invest in that piece, but then obviously have some capital, et cetera, et cetera. So I built out these platforms for both cities where it was TA, really government supports, thinking about the economic development sort of motivation to bring folks in when necessary, or work with existing businesses that are already there, and then wrap around with capital. So those were the first two clients I had. And then at that point, I was like, I don't want to be the grocery store guy. How can I figure out how to get out of this? But maybe think about it at a higher order. So move into this idea of community wealth building with the rubric of these community anchors at the core of them. So I was like, if I can refine what a community anchor was and what it means to invest in one, then I can talk about what it means to think about wealth building. Right? So that's where Urbane was born.
And obviously, and I want to talk about what's going on in the city and with Mangrove now. Is it Mangrove?
Yeah.
Mangrove. All right. But before we get there, I think some of the insights and what excites me around this, community infrastructure and bridging between municipalities and what might be happening naturally in the ecosystem with entrepreneurs. It's such a fascinating moment because I feel like with everything that's happening, especially around AI, there's going to be a moment where it's going to be like, I don't want to be the AI guy. Because there's a similar level of bridge building, but on a much more almost, I don't want to say complex, it's an overused word, but so I feel like there is probably transferable either memories or skill sets potentially let me ask you, is it transferable? Are there transferable patterns that you see around how we bridge build around these emerging phenomena?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about AI, and I think there's a fascination and a misconception of what it can do currently, but there's an awesome opportunity to think about what it can be. I just finished reading this book called, and I always jack the name up, but I think it's right though. It's fully automated luxury communism.
Oh,
It was written maybe about 5 years or 6 years ago, and the idea of, I mean, I think you've been seeing a lot of these sort of books and theorists thinking about, are we at the end of capitalism finally? You know, when I was in school, it was Francis Fukuyama talking about the end of history kind of thing. It was
Yeah.
more on the political, social side of things. But now I think technology sort of is the great leveler, to your point around migrations.
Yeah.
And whether we are or we aren't, the real question is like questioning everything. And we think about, at least in my mind, what AI is, it is sort of learning in real time what the questions are, right? And so whoever can get to the question set faster and help AI figure out what the answers could or should be, like you build upon what that platform can look like. And I think for a community, I've always dreamed this thing, you know, and again, I didn't have the words for it until these technologies have emerged, but I think we're getting to this place where the collective intelligence of community has a real important place in what that baseline for AI is going to be.
Yeah.
And right now, when we think about large language models and how they capture data, it's this sort of idea of this like massive moat of information you have to get, where it's billions and billions of pieces of data points. I'll fast forward because 2019, I was a Aspen Fellow, and my reason why I was a fellow was about baseline data sets that, what I mentioned earlier, went narrow and deep, right? They weren't about this massive set of information points you're trying to sort of flag. It was a very niche set of data. And I felt like the future of technology was going to be trillions of niche data sets as compared to one big moat. And when you think about communities that we work in, it's a little bit of both, right? You have all these sort of bespoke, thin sets of data that are really deep. And then you tie them up, right? So you think about the Rising Tide community, for instance, as an example. We all have our own ones, but you can stitch them together.
Yeah.
And you have a really interesting sort of tapestry that's happening. And you can model against that. You can create segments against that. You can do all the really cool things.
Yes.
Or the data points. The tricky thing is having community understand their role in that. And one, not have it be like the last set of innovations that have occurred in our society where, you know, innovation was built on the backs of the oppressed and the marginalized. They got no benefit from it. And matter of fact, they were harmed because of it, right? Whether you're talking about vaccinations or other things that, you know, end of the day, were tested on people, right? Like the outcome was a good one ultimately, but like who had to suffer to get to that outcome, right? And I think in this context we're in right now, it's a very similar thing where data is an asset already. And it's certainly going to be a much more lucrative and important asset for folks to think about, whether you're talking about amassed sort of aggregated data sets or even individual sets that come from our people, et cetera. Big tech is already there. Like they're already thinking about how to monetize your individual data sets at a level that we haven't thought about yet. They're doing it to something with the ads, but it goes way deeper than that.
Way deeper.
And so when you think about automating that experience and building an engine to do that, it's a race. And I think what's interesting about where we are now is there's a insurgency, there's a counterinsurgency, there's all these players sort of setting up the chessboard right now.
Yeah.
And I often worry about we're just not in the game, right? And getting into the game is the first. Like like win or lose, you can't be you can't do the thing you want to do if you're not in the game. And I'm like, how do we get our folks in the game? And so that's what I'm thinking about now.
Okay. So let me challenge that a little bit because I think part of, you know, and you'll notice this in all of my metaphors and also where my alley cat wandering has brought me into, which is entrepreneurship, in large part because there is no, problem solution. There is no question answer. And you probably get this in my metaphors. It's rivers, it's migrations, it's like, so my constant reset with myself, with anybody that I'm talking to, is that there is a dimension where it would be easier for us to be like, oh, we have, issue with, disease and epidemics and pandemics, we need to study them, we need to have a solution for it, and we have vaccines. Good, check, moving on. It's like, no, there is no check and moving on. Right. We're in constant evolution, we're in constant migration. The next set of issues that we're gonna deal around biological transformation and where tech meets biology, we are in a whole new uncharted territory right there that requires our mindsets to not be thinking, oh, that's settled. And now we're off to this next challenge. No, there is nothing settled about it. It's in constant flux, just like the rivers, just like the oceans, just like our cultures, our conversations, even this modality to say, let's have conversations. It's really trying to remind us that, hey, actually, there is no question, answer, set, checkbox, move on. We are in a very complex, emergent, constantly shifting environment. And what I love about entrepreneurs, including alley cats like yourself and myself, is that we're comfortable with that constant change and can somehow make meaning out of the constant change, because the constant change does not mean chaos. It's not constant chaos. There is still meaning making. There is still the creation of the new and agreement about the problems that we would want to define even as problems. And so that part is, what's in my mind when I think about data and tech and AI right now, and how this is different than anything we've ever had before. I think on one dimension, it's just the speed of movement and what exponential change even means. That part, which we can't wrap our minds around, and is different than perhaps how we've experienced innovation and technology in the past. So that's, I kind of want to invite the fluidity of the moment that we're in, and then how do we still then structure? How do we still then think about depth and think about niche when we know things are getting formulated and reformulated in new ways? Really, while we're talking, probably so much has already happened, right? And how do we make sense of that as the new entrepreneurs or the new social entrepreneurs that are navigating that moment right now?
Well, you bring up a lot of interesting sort of talking points. I think yes. Going back to the matrix metaphor, right? So if this is version 6 of Urbane, to your point, it is the fluidity.
It's constantly shifting to meet the moment.
Because I think, and it's been hard some entrepreneurs just naturally get what we're talking about. So other ones don't, because they're thinking about an older modality, which is like, I build a company.
I have a product. It solves a problem.
And then I'm trying to
changes the problem.
And I'm trying to exit.
Yes.
And then so it's like, okay, this is the off ramp, right? Yes. And I think for a lot of social entrepreneurs who want to solve a social issue, right? Like to your point, there is no sort of start and stop, right? Yeah. I think it was one of the things where you think about nonprofits wanted to work themselves out of business, sort of that construct, where I'm like, does that really ever really happen? Like, end of the day,
because if you're or is that what we tell ourselves so we can feel better?
Right. And I'm like, but as a human, I need an off ramp at some point because I want to retire, I want to raise my kids, I want to do something else. And so, how do you evolve your platform, your company, your concept in a way that like you can sort of survive and live as your life changes, right? And so, I think there's a very human dimension to what you're getting at. And what's fascinating in the moment is like, when I think about AI, I'm like, oh, it could be a great leveler to, and if you go back to the book I was mentioning before, automating communism is the construct of it, and get rid of all the sort of social political stuff for a second. Just the idea of a collectivist economy, because you don't have to work and your labor is not going to be a thing that is the engine that drives economic growth, because you have so much automated structures in place to do it for you. Mm-hmm. So at some point, the loss of job can either mean the death of capitalism, but it could birth something completely different that could be, frankly, more leisurely, more healthy, et cetera, if we're open to creating that society for ourselves. But you still have to sort of get to a place where it stops being winner and loser, and it becomes more collectivist to some extent. Yeah. And so I think what's fascinating now is technology, to your point around the pacing of it. Like, it's moving fast enough where for the first time and maybe ever, you could see the exponential evolution moving quick enough to have that new reality in a relatively short period of time. Like you could create the chipset, you can create the sort of quantum mechanics to sort of make that happen, create the robotics, you create all things that like could actually create the structures of a new sort of political economy. But with the real big but, for certainly the power structure has to be open enough or forced to, depending on how you want to think about it, to move off of a winner or loser zero-sum game structure, right? And or the collectivist actions that we're talking about around building a new, political economy, creating a new social economy, can rise up and take the place of our existing structure, right? And they both have to happen kind of concurrently.
Yes.
And the question is going to be how volatile is that shift, right?
And also, I think like the baby in that bathwater is agency. I mean, we're talking about agentic AI or everything being done for you, or even when we're talking about collectivist, and I've been doing a lot more thinking about collectivist and individualist cultures, even just at a cultural level, forget the political and, other dimensions of it. And for me, the thing that I value, having been raised in a more collectivist culture, the thing I value about being in an economy in a country like this one is that as an individual, I'm able to express my agency. I'm able to say what I want to create is this and pursue that, with all the lessons that come along the way. And so that agentiality, which we've been grappling with as to how we as individuals and communities of individuals can have as collectivists, how can we have that expression without it being oppression, without it being actually, the algorithms have already figured out what you're going to eat and how that's going to maximize, resources and minimize harm. And all of a sudden you're unable to make choices that maybe matter to you and define your desires and define your sense of freedom. And your ability to say, you know what, I'm kind of tired of bodegas. It's not that the bodegas and food desert issue has been solved, but you as an individual are like, I can't be a utility to that at this moment because I'm evolving, my desires are changing, and the freedom to be able to do that and then to go off and pursue something else with a sense of agency is profound. And there's such an implication there around choice. And then when you get to choose to belong, as opposed to being forced to belong, those are also different dynamics. So I'm wondering how, as you're especially, and we can bring it to the crescendo of what it is that you're doing with Mangrove and building community at different levels, and how it is that in this moment that we can build communities and places, perhaps with real estate. I imagine real estate will continue to play a role in some way or another, in a way that still fosters belonging, in a way that brings the best of technology into play for a sense of agency and creativity, and not less of it. I'm thinking about the big kind of crescendo of what we're leading up to here.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our Future Tide conversation with James Johnson-Piett. We hope you found his insights on community, data, and innovation as inspiring as we did. Remember to subscribe and share this episode with friends who would be inspired by James's journey. And don't forget to tune in to part 2, where we'll continue the conversation and dive deeper into how James is scaling community wealth building and what his vision means for the future. Stay connected with us at risingtidecapital.org and future.risingtidecapital.org for more updates. Future Tide Conversations is powered by Rising Tide Capital, a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission and this podcast are made possible by supporters like you.